Greetings and welcome to HillCrest Wine Club, March of 2023 release. As I'm doing this video, this tasting video, outside like every 5 minutes it's changing. We've had a little bit of almost sleet slush this morning, and right now it's beautiful blue sky but super windy, but we're into an Oregon spring, which is a beautiful thing. So it's nice to see a little bit of that sunshine poking out of there. So this release we have a couple of red wines, one of which we've done before, actually, I take that back. Actually, both of these we've done before in terms of varietals. We're going to start off with our Teraldigo, just our second release of Teraldigo, and that's a variety that we were the first ones that I know of in Oregon to plant it in 2001. We used it as a blender for a while, and then the 2015, those of you that have been a member that long in the wine club might remember that wine. It was just enough pretty much to put out into the wine club. We're going to taste the 20 vintage of that, and then we have Nera d'Avola, and this is a very classic variety we'll talk about from Sicily for our international wine selection that is ultra beautiful, drinkable. And then to finish off with 27 Alta Schule, which is drinking great right now. So anyway, without further ado, we'll jump into it. Teraldigo, it said that there's somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 grape varieties in the world, and those are not all wine grapes, but a large percentage of those are made into wine. And an example of this is they say in Italy there's 2,800 varieties in the ground. So that's an overwhelming number. And that's probably the greatest, if not one of the greatest selections or variety of selections in the world in one country. A place like Spain might be the same thing as well. Parts of the old world. But Teraldigo is something in 1990, there were only about 500 acres of it in northern Italy as you drop off the Alps by Bolzano down into what's called the Po Valley, the very kind of beginning of the Po Valley where risotto and that comes from. But on these gravel benchlands and that, there's an area called Teraldigo Rotagliano. And that was an area that always made workhorse wines. A lot of the wine was never put into bottle, was just consumed. And a very young lady by the name of Elisabetta Foradori decided in the 80s, 90s that she was going to turn this into a grape variety and really prove what this variety could do. And she has very much done that. She's the benchmark for that variety really globally. Teraldigo since then has been planted in other parts of Italy. It's planted in Tuscany a little bit as a blender and that. It's planted in the New World. Australia has some. My first experience with it was in California, that Mondavi had a program that we began making Italian varietals really for the second generation in California. So in the 1880s, as the Italians kind of spread all over the world, many of you might know wineries like Italian Swiss Colony out of Sonoma or Asti specifically, that was the largest winery in the world, and they did Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Barbera, these kinds of things. There was a renaissance of Italian varietals really beginning in about the 90s and that quite a few wineries, especially in California, began experimenting. And at Mondavi, I can't tell you how many, but it was probably 20 to 30 varieties that we experimented with and made several of those into commercial wine. And for me, the standout when I was allowed to taste those wines was the Teraldigo. And for many different reasons, economic and such, those programs oftentimes were shut down in the north coast of California because it was hard to sell Teraldigo for $100 or you could sell Cabernet for $100. So when I came north here, my dear friend Scott Kelly actually got me access to one of the selections. We had two selections at Mondavi of Teraldigo, and I took that selection, brought it up here, planted a little bit over on Old Garden Valley and that. And since then we've planted, there's other places. There's a vineyard we're going to taste here, comes out of actually Umpqua, kind of the epicenter of the valley. And it's something I think is so spectacular and beautiful. It's a variety that has huge potential here. There's only a couple people that are currently making it, but as a reference point, I would say Teraldigo, and it's actually related. There are quite a few grape varieties that have Syrah or some of the parents of Syrah in their lineage, and that is the case with Teraldigo. Teraldigo has that kind of that richness, that sweetness, that medium plus body, very kind of more perfumey, more kind of black fruit typically, a little bit racier acidity and maybe a little bit more structure. Where Syrah tends to be a little bit softer, Teraldigo tends to be a little bit more kind of punchy, I'd say, in the nose in terms of jumping out of the glass, and then in the mouth tends to be rich but a little bit brighter, and that really kind of lends itself when we think about Italian. One of the things that separates Italian reds from French reds is the amount of acidity, and some of that's variety, but a lot of that's cultural in terms of where they pick in that, with Italian varietals being probably the highest acid red wines in the world in terms of a major country in the old world. And a lot of that has to do with wine is consumed with food almost exclusively. So anyway, this is the 2020 vintage. So this saw just about 2 years in barrel, trying to capture the real youthful fruit character in that. But let's take her for a spin. Super perfumey, almost like mulberry cassis, which is this perfumey black fruit. If you've ever had, we've all had cassis, usually as jam or jelly or something like that, but really comes up out of the glass, but super fresh. And a little bit of I get a little bit of sweetness from the wood, a little spice, a little vanilla, and that's definitely wood related. Whenever you smell vanilla, that comes from oak. Vanillin is something that is in oak. As it ages, becomes more and more dominant, and you put wine, of course, in a barrel, you pick that up. Nice and fresh, round, very young. Very fine tannins. There's quite a bit of tannin in this, so this has more structure, kind of a different structure than Syrah. Very kind of fine, almost like when you peel the orange, I talk about that little white rind, you get that kind of softness or whatever, but it coats the whole mouth, and then I still get that beautiful acidity and freshness. So definitely, it's a wine you can drink on its own, but I think with the kind of things that are richer is interesting. A nice like charcuterie plate would be fantastic. Foods are a little bit richer in that, and we're starting to get into the kind of the time of the year that we, maybe grill a little bit, or as we get into Easter and that kind of the richness of lamb, or even ham. Ham would be really interesting with this wine. That acidity really would tend to punch the like smokiness of smoked ham that would be very beautiful, as well as the sweetness. And that's one of the nice things about acidity. When you put acidity on food, and it can be lemons on an oyster, other forms of acidity, in that it basically takes delicate flavors and it pops them, and wine does the same thing. And that's what the Italians discovered a long time ago, but definitely food or table-driven wines. So with that, we'll move to Nero d'Avola. And Nero is black, from the city of Avola, which is a city in southeastern Sicily. So Sicily, as we know, is the great trading post from North Africa into Europe, and it really is, even to this day, is not considered part of Italy, but of course is. There's the town of Syracuse, which is down in the southeast, and many people believe that's how Syrah came out of the Middle East, what is now Iran, into Europe. It stopped off there, and that's perhaps where the name Syrah was picked up and then moved north. One of the dominant, very traditional grapes, but not a big grape up until about 20, 30 years ago, is Nero d'Avola. And Nero d'Avola is it can be made into two styles. One is a kind of modern style that's more Cabernet-ish, that's kind of heavily extracted, kind of aggressive tannins, finished in wood for quite a while, but to where the wood is a dominant component, where there's new wood on it. That is one style. There's another style that's kind of medium plus weight that is very kind of creamy, rich. You tend to get more red fruit out of the wines. They tend to be very perfumey, and they tend to have this beautiful acidity that just smelling the wines makes you salivate in anticipation of tasting it. So this is from a very famous producer. It's dry farmed, head trained, so this means there's no trellising. It's the vine coming up, and if you look down at the vine, it almost would look like a wagon wheel with the trunk coming up and these permanent arms, and then off of those arms would be your shoots and your fruit. And that's a system, the Romans invented, as far as we know, called gobelet, which is goblet, because it looks like a goblet with the stem and the arms coming up. But this is dry farmed, very classically made. This wine spends about a year in wood, but there's not a strong wood influence on this wine. That wood also allows the wines to kind of soften, open up, and manifest themselves. It's a little bit like, fanning something open, and so you get to see really what that fruit is like without any of the filter of looking through the wood to see that. So anyway. Yeah, a beautiful kind of succulent, red, kind of bright cherry fruit, but it has that sweetness where cherries are really ripe and they get that sweet character, but you still see that acid kind of popping through there a little bit. This has that in the nose. I don't pick up like I said, any woods whatsoever, but this wine really, these two wines really are jumping up out of the glass. And I've mentioned this before, but that's one of the signs to me of interesting wines is that, there's some wines you have to drag them out of the glass a little bit and they can still be beautiful smelling and tasting, but they don't kind of greet you. To me, the great wines really, before you even get close to smelling, it's kind of up in your grill, as I like to say, so. Mouthful, very, very sweet fruit and pure, like the Le Pig and this little piggy in that you really just see. This has more structure, more tannin, as most reds do than that, but you just really see this beautiful red fruit just kind of coating the entire palate, and very velvety, soft, medium plus bodied. So, once again, this is a nice wine for this time of year that kind of straddles a lot of different things, from richer foods to you start to grill a little bit, or maybe things that are a little bit lighter. But super, super classic. Nero d'Avola is gaining more in popularity in Sicily. There's also a wine, and we've made a couple of these out of Acate or Vittoria, which is in Sicily and that. But there's a wine, Cersuelo, that's a blend of an old variety called Frappato that we have a lot of interest in here. But Frappato with Nero d'Avola, that's something to look for. Maybe down in the road a little bit, we can introduce you to one of those. So. Okay, to finish up with 27 Altschule, something that's a benchmark for us. Altschule in German meaning old school. This is a very traditional old style of Riesling. It was made 100 years ago. So this comes off of a vineyard called Kluserother Bruderschaft. And this is a big, big face that faces entirely south. And from a vineyard that's very kind of rocky and is in the middle, or what we say the tenderloin of the hillside, which is at the top, it's very cool because you have the air passing over. At the bottom, you get cool weather, especially in the spring, so it tends not to have as long a growing season because that cold air falls towards the very bottom of the hill. The middle is just that perfect little protected spot, and you see that many places in the world. You see that in Burgundy with the Grand Crus, the great vineyards of Burgundy, kind of tucked up in the middle of the hill. Same thing is true in the Mosel. This is what's known as an Einzellage, which is like a Grand Cru or super, super special vineyard within the greater Mosel. So I'm starting to pick up a little bit, 2017, a little bit of color. So we're 5 years old here, and I had this wine last night, and I can report it smells and tastes great. So starting to pick up a little bit of this beautiful kind of waxy sweet fruit, a little quince, very much like kumquat, and then there's a little bit of this kind of aromatic of a little bit of petrols, we would say. And this is classic German. The best German Rieslings with age pick this up. This just has like a kiss of that, which is, the French have a saying, a little bit of anything is a complexity. And that smell is one of the benchmark smells for great Riesling for myself. So once again, very low alcohol, beautiful acidity, a lot of green apple acid. It's amazing in a wine that's 8% alcohol to have this fat, this richness, this weight, and so elegant. There's a very good reason that Riesling was the most expensive wine for the last 200 years in Europe up until the early 1970s, the great Mosel, great Rheingau. And my mouth still is salivating in anticipation of tasting it. Certain varieties, and there are minority varieties, are high in this malic acid, which is a green apple acid that just causes you to salivate in anticipation of the next taste, and just really spectacular. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner is our recommendation. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for your support, and I hope you really enjoy these wines. Would love to see some comments if you have any questions about these wines. The final shipment of this season for us, which will be in May, and then after that, of course, we move into the warmer season and won't ship until the fall. I'm going to prime you a little bit. It's the most unusual variety and region for international we've ever done, and a truly spectacular wine that speaks to the roots and the beginning of winemaking in the world. So with that, I would say adieu, and to the genie in the bottle. Cheers.